Welcome to the program. My name is Marty Schenkman. I'm joined by Baron Henley from Affinity Consulting, Mary Vandernack, who's one of the most tech-savvy practitioners and has more computers than anyone else I know, and Jonathan Blottmacher, who has been way ahead of the curve in thinking about technology in the office of the future, which is really the office of now. We did a program some weeks ago on technology and remote work, and we not only had an incredible response in terms of people registering and attending, but we had scores and scores and scores of questions after. We had so many questions, and so many of them were really so good that we decided to take those questions and create a follow-up webinar to help respond to the issues and some of the questions that people had. And that's what this program is going to be. So we're going to get started, and before we get started, we're going to have a quick word from two of our sponsors. Our first is Interactive Legal. Vanessa?
Hi, Marty. Thanks so much, and thanks to all of our panelists and to everybody for listening in today. My name is Vanessa Kanega. I am the president of Interactive Legal, and we're proud to sponsor this webinar. Just like to again say thanks to all the panelists. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a subject that's obviously near and dear to our hearts. If you're not familiar with Interactive Legal, please visit our website, interactivelegal.com. We provide drafting software as well as education and other resources for estate planning and elder law attorneys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vanessa. One of the things that some of you may be interested in, Jonathan and I have done a number of webinars, and we're going to do a few more on practical planning and drafting for the current environment. We did one with Abigail O'Connor on drafting core documents in the current environment. We did another one on, I think it was 7 useful or key estate planning techniques to use in the current environment. We're going to do a follow-up with a practical planning and drafting for SLATs, which is really sort of the default plan many use. And those will all be on the Schenkman Law website. And in those webinars, Teresa Bush from Interactive Legal was really helpful and very insightful. And we created slides and sample language that will help you whether or not you use drafting software. But if you don't and want to see how drafting software can make you incredibly more efficient, those programs will help you see that and understand what Interactive Legal does. Peak Trust, Nicole?
Hi, yes. Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Peak Trust is honored to be able to sponsor today's presentation. Here at Peak Trust Company, we are doing our part to be safe and to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. These are definitely uncertain times, and our team continues to remain available and ready to provide world-class service. As a full-service administrative trust company, we welcome the opportunity to partner with you and your clients to help them achieve their estate planning goals. Please feel free to reach out to myself or any member of the team. I also invite you to browse our website at peaktrust.com. Thank you, Marty.
Thanks, Nicole. One of the things that we've done on all of the programs I've hosted for probably more than a year, maybe longer, is each webinar we mention a charity. And I'm going to mention a charity and then mention another thought for all of you. So the charity on the screen is the American Brain Foundation. I've listed the executive director's name who could not join us today because of some of the challenges. It is an incredible organization. They have a very close working relationship with the American Academy of Neurology. So they are able to work with the brightest minds in neurology to cherry pick the best research projects to put charitable donation dollars to fund brain research. An incredible organization, and right now they have started a COVID committee where they're looking into brain damage and neurological implications of COVID, yet another implication of this horrible virus. Just another thought for those of you who want to do good in this difficult time. A lot of the restaurants that many of you may have frequented and enjoyed prior to COVID may be struggling and still struggling, even with the phased reopenings, may continue to struggle. So a good deed that I might suggest for all of you is find some of the restaurants that you've always enjoyed and pay them as a good deed to cater a meal for first responders in your area, such as the ambulance corps, fire department. It's a great way to do a good deed, let first responders know people in the community care, and help a restaurant who you've enjoyed for potentially years or decades stay in business. We're going to get started with our program, and I'm going to turn it over to Baron. I'll turn the slides when Baron says. Baron is the mastermind behind a lot of the ideas and stuff we have, so he's going to lead the charge here. And Mary will comment, and Jonathan and I will comment. But Baron, before you start, I want to give Jonathan a minute to make an introductory comment, and we'll give him a last word at the end. Jonathan?
Thank you, Marty. As Marty pointed out, more than 10 years ago, I wrote a detailed article on practice in the future. And many of the things that are happening now, I said would happen, but they were very slow coming on until today. And going back to when I got out of law school 50 years ago, the world is entirely different. And I began thinking about how could I, if I were caught in a situation where I couldn't come into Manhattan to work, how could I get my work done? There was FedEx at that time, but there were no fax machines. There was no word processing of any kind. And it was extremely difficult. You couldn't even get your mail that had been sent to the office unless you packaged it up again and sent it, which was expensive. All of that has now changed, and it's really something that's very important. And now you can work from home or virtually anywhere with almost the same efficiency as you can at home. In fact, some say it's even more efficient to work at home. Sometimes you get distractions at work that you don't get at home. And of course, if you have young kids or something, you may find greater distractions at home. But the time has come for home office work. And I'm guessing that it will not work more than 50% of the work that lawyers and related professionals like accountants do will be done from their home. So let's get going with that as quickly as we can, and there are great opportunities.
And Baron, before you launch into this, can I just make a comment about it? So the question that came in was about the affordability of subscription, trust and estate legal services. What are the options? And while we want to answer that specific question, I think, Baron and I have collaborated on a lot of document automation webinars and materials over the years. And one of my favorite sayings, and it's from one of the presentations, I don't think we have it in here today, but is if you're pulling up another client's document and you're making changes to that, just stop it. And I'd actually like to hear you share your view on that before you kind of jump into the comparisons, Baron.
Baron, we're not hearing you.
If you're recycling old documents into new ones, you're introducing a margin for error, which is avoidable and could be damaging. It's just simply too easy to leave stuff in you should have taken out, leave something out you should have added, miss a pronoun, miss a verb conjugation, miss a person's name. You set yourself up for embarrassment. It's slow in addition to its other drawbacks. And there's another component to that that's troublesome, and that is by recycling Word and WordPerfect documents for years and decades, they accumulate digital baggage and become unstable over time. And I've received hundreds and hundreds of, in particular, Word files. People have emailed me and say, "What is wrong with this? It's completely sideways. I can't control it. Formatting is all messed up. I don't know what happened." And that problem just becomes more acute over time if you keep doing that. So, and really, option number one, I didn't add to this slide, but option number one is build simple Word or WordPerfect templates that have no automation whatsoever. And if they're set up correctly, then the formatting will always work, and the paragraph numbering will always work, and your cross references will automatically update. Your page numbering will be right. If you got a table of contents and a trust or something like that, it will automatically update. And you'll only have to worry about the content. And I think most people are used to somewhat of a wrestling match to get the document to look the way they want. And particularly with COVID-19, one of the big problems that we've encountered with practitioners is that they're to some degree reliant upon support staff to get the documents the final mile. In other words, make it look good enough that we could print it and the client could sign it. That is, and the reason I didn't put interactive legal in there was because I thought that's what they were talking about. But ultimately, like what you can afford, like you got to invest in your practice. And a lot of times I find if you look at the volume you're doing and how much time you could save, the cost benefit analysis must be run. You can't just go, oh, that just doesn't pass the smell test. Like, interactive legal is too expensive. It may or may not be. It depends on how much you're spending to generate documents now, how much time you're spending, what is your internal cost of production. And most lawyers don't have any idea what that is. Particularly if you're charging a flat fee, they're not even keeping track of their time. And sometimes the lawyer keeps track of their time, but they don't keep, the support staff people that are involved in generating the documents aren't tracking their time at all. And if you added all of that up and you had a stopwatch on all the time that was spent, you might find that what you think you can't afford, you can actually afford. And actually it would make sense and it would pay for itself. And the experts say that if it pays for itself within 1 year, that you should pull the trigger. But there's a definite answer to that question, but it cannot be ascertained until you crunch the numbers. So,
Baron,
yeah.
Baron, this is Jonathan. Of course, I was the one who started Interactive Legal 25 years ago. And of course, I'm completely familiar with it. But I tell people when they're looking at either our system or another system, you have to understand that the price you pay is not what you pay the company for the system. It's the time you put in to learn the system and how to manipulate it. But I can tell you that if you have someone in your office, whether it's your secretary or some assistant, put in the information about the client, you can do most documents, whether it's a charitable lead trust, whether it's a will, whether it's a revoced, no matter what it is, you can probably do it honest to goodness in under 10 minutes. And no one can do that. In addition, because the law changes so quickly, you've got to update your forms. And no one keeps their forms up as rapidly as companies that offer it. We make dozens of changes to our forms each year. And I'm not going to try to embarrass anybody who's on the line, but I know that most lawyers have not gone ahead and added the deeming provision to their wills and trusts, which is critical if you want to save your clients money. You also haven't put in the anti-Hubert provision that needs to be in everything where you have a marital deduction. These things are missed by most lawyers. It takes a tremendous amount of time to draft it. But just let me give one example. If you decide that your client could save income taxes by creating an incomplete non-grantor trust, known as an ING trust, if you sit down and try to read the rulings or read the articles that Marty and Bill Lipkin and I and others have written, you will spend 20 hours getting that done. But if you go to a system that already has an ING trust, even if you put in a lot of time reading it, you're going to spend under an hour to do it. So what Baron has said about greater efficiency is there. Don't turn your back on it. You can do a better job for your client more consistently, and you can make more money.
Yeah, and the general rule of thumb, I always tell people, if you've got a good automated system, you should be able to crank out an entire set of documents in about 20 minutes. And you can compare that against what it's taking you to do it now. And you've got to add not just the lawyer's time, but also the support staff person's time and everything that went into that. And if you can squeeze that down into a tiny little sliver of time, but charge the same in the form of a flat fee, your effective hourly rate is going to be dramatically higher. I mean, you can't explode profitability if you do that right.
And that's what I think needs to go into that cost benefit analysis, right? I am automated in hot docs just because I started automating in hot docs years ago. But if I were starting a practice today, is even just my healthcare power of attorney with this COVID-19, how many like really deep conversations have we had with clients about what every line means in the healthcare power of attorney? And I actually track the time investment that I have redone my entire healthcare power of attorney over the last few weeks. And that's like 28 hours of my own time. If instead that were, now I can create a healthcare power of attorney in 2 minutes or less once I have it, but that's the time I spent trying to set up those provisions and, revising them in hot docs. So I think the affordability question becomes really, if you run it down the line, how much does it cost to buy a service and what are the advantages of it? As opposed to like, if you're, a lot of attorneys, like I'm a geek who's going to go through line by line on a regular basis. And I just made notes on what Jonathan said to make sure I have those covered in my trust. But that is the big advantage, just like it is the advantage of being on the cloud where they update your programs, right? So you have to kind of think through when you say you can't afford, when you look at how quickly I can draft a super complex trust in less than 20 minutes.
I'm not as bright or capable as Mary and Jonathan, and I would say it probably takes me an hour using interactive legal, maybe 2 hours sometimes to draft a document. But the difference is in part that I'm spending a lot of time thinking and planning as I click the buttons, not just clicking a button. And that shortens the time on the back end in terms of review or modifying the trust. But even an hour or two compared to what any of us spent manipulating a Word document is insignificant. And I just want to reemphasize the point Jonathan made and that everybody's made. It's not just a cost analysis, it's a cost benefit analysis. And that's what Mary said. And the benefits are that you will not only be able to create documents dramatically more efficiently, you will be comfortable doing documents you may not otherwise have done. And you can avoid the, 28 hours Mary spent revising a form, because you have templates in front of you. And I think more important than anything, and I think this is a phrase, I don't remember if Jonathan or I said it, but it came out in one of the drafting webinars that I mentioned earlier. And that is that you don't want to fit a client into a form, you want to fit the form into the client. And when you have, Jonathan, how many different forms trusts may exist on Interactive? I mean, if you added in all the variants, it's scores and scores, if not hundreds.
I would guess, Marty, if you put in the variations, it's over 10,000. But we have about 30 forms of trust, some of which are fantastic. I created something called the Extra Crummy Trust, which is absolutely terrific if you're doing annual exclusion gifts for your clients. And all my clients liked it. And Mike Graham, who's my co-developer for wealth transfer planning, and I wrote an article a few years ago in the Probate and Property for the American Bar Association. But it's great. No one else has that form. You can look at it and get it created almost instantly, and it's much better than your typical crummy form. Much, much better indeed. And you don't have to use it just for life insurance. You can use it for other assets as well. We have an Alaska Community Property Trust. So if your clients are living in a non-community property jurisdiction, but want the double step up in basis when the first spouse dies, you can do it with an Alaska Community Property Trust. But if you sat down and tried to draft it from scratch, you're in for at least a dozen hours. And yet with ours, it's so I'll say no more, but these systems are fantastic. And again, the price you pay is not what you pay the company. The price you pay is learning the system and then being able to use it, manipulate it. But you'll save yourself tremendous time. You can do it better and less expensive time for your clients.
Aaron, let's go on.
Enough said. Document automation options in Word. Those, quick parts and auto text is a way to, it's like a text expander. You can take chunks of text, clauses, multiple pages, and easily drop them into new documents. Macros can be used for that as well. Mail merge is a way where you have a data source and a merge document, so you can have like all of the details and data in a spreadsheet, for example, and merge those in wherever they need to go into your forms. And then there's fill-in fields and content controls, which you can access on the developer ribbon within Word, which of course is not shown by default in Word. So you can Google that on how to reveal the developer ribbon, which will open up a bunch of automation tools for you. And then all of that stuff, there's nerds out there that can do all that for you if you're not interested in doing it. But this assumes, of course, that you have a template to start with. Once you get a template to start with, something to which you always return when you start a new document of that type, then you can start layering in other things that are already built into Word, but which most people don't take advantage of.
And so I use the quick parts even for like really simple things. So let's say you have software, but on a regular basis, you're forwarding emails, and people always give me grief about my really short emails just because I have a high volume. So I was just trying to kind of respond to that. But what I did is created quick parts for certain types of emails that I respond to on a regular basis that just inserts more text than I would normally write when I'm trying to answer 100 COVID-19 emails per hour. And the other piece is the quick steps, right? Which is actually more of a process automation. If there's anything that I do on a regular basis, it's kind of a different, I think it's really a macro, but if I'm like on a regular basis, send an email to 2 or 3 different groups or something like that, I can just automate that as a quick part.
Yeah, the same tools, almost all the same tools exist in Outlook that exist in Word. So you can automate your emails as well. Advantage and disadvantage of Hot Docs. The reality is Hot Docs can do anything you can think of. I can take a Hot Docs template and it can produce whatever you could possibly conceive of, and therefore it is complicated. It's a programming language essentially, and unless you're oriented that way, it's a little overwhelming. So you have to understand how Word works fundamentally, and you've got to learn the tool. Once those things are learned, you can do some amazing stuff. I mean, I automated my own practice back in 1993 with Hot Docs and continued using it since then. So, you know, it's doable, but you have to want to do it, and you have to enjoy it. I like doing that kind of stuff, and in my experience, most people don't. But it will allow you to build your entire decision tree into the system, and it doesn't matter how many branches you've got. You can generate completely customized documents, your documents, of course. And if you don't want to deal with it, of course, there's people you can outsource it to. The mastery of Word is probably the biggest problem here. If you don't understand how to set up, you know, a multi-level list with automatic paragraph numbering using styles correctly, you're going to have lots of formatting glitches in the documents that you generate as a result of your programming efforts, and you'll spend a lot of time cleaning that up. They are 100%, you can get rid of all of them if it's set up right. But whether or not you can get it set up right really comes down to how much you know about Word. The programming, you know, if you've never done programming, then it's going to be a little confusing, but it is learnable, but it's going to take a lot of time, and I would argue it's not often a good use of otherwise billable time to learn to do programming, unless, of course, you enjoy it. The cost, they are all subscription now, so there's no more perpetual licenses. You can't just buy it and never pay for it again. And then, of course, you're going to have to update your own documents when the law changes. And as Jonathan pointed out, my experience is the same. I review documents all the time, and I'm like, wow, these have not been looked at in a while. That's kind of the reality of it.
And I think one of the advantages that we should be on here that we might not have had was that, oh, we do have never answered the same question, but that's the answers file. So I can input the information about my client. And we actually have it for certain different types of documents where somebody can send that to us, and we can put that in our document management system, which is integrated with Hot Docs. But the joy is you should never answer a name, you know, never enter somebody's name more than once. And one of the ways I know if somebody's not using the system is if I do find somebody has spelled somebody, you know, John V. Doe in one place and John V. Doe, I'm like, oh, you don't know how to use the answers files, right?
Right.
And the other thing, though, that's really important is that you actually have templates to start with, and you create some consistency. So we talk more about training later, but one of the things that we do is say, hey, before you can automate a document, you have to have a base document. And so we'll take, you know, I used to automate my own, but frankly, Barron's helped me with my trust documents in recent years. But to get that ready is we'll lay out, you know, here's alternate 1, alternate 2, alternate 3 that we use, alternate 4, and then we'll decide how to structure that. But, you know, even if you don't go to Hot Docs, base templates that you use. So our rule in our place is you never ever pull up a document. It's a fireable offense. You don't pull up another client document and use that. If you have some document you're going to create that we don't have a form for, which is highly unlikely, but if that's the case, then you can pull up a client document, you can save it as a new document, create a form, and then use your form.
By the way, I haven't called it a fireable offense, and flogging I don't think is appropriate. But we never, I hope ever, for many, 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 many years have ever had anyone pull up another client Word document. If anybody ever, that's a lot of evers on purpose, needs to use something that we can't get out of a document generation system, we do exactly what Mary just said. We create a form. We do nothing but create a form. After we create a form, we'll tailor it to the document. And each time we use that form for another client matter, we may go back and amend the form for new variables or options that we think of, but we never, ever, I hope ever, use a document from one client for another. As Baron said earlier, it's just, it will bite you in the backside and then some.
Yep.
Baron?
So on this question, I think it's easy to illustrate with an example. So we did a project for a firm that had a very large estate planning department within the larger firm. We automated their drafting process completely and took, the average time from 8 hours down to 30 minutes. And they achieved almost no gains because the process was so screwed up. They had, just to give you some examples, they consolidated all drafting in one associate lawyer. So the problem was there was a queue of all the lawyers would put their files in the queue, and then she would draft them in the order they were received, first in, first out. The problem was no one ever gave her all the information she needed to finish it. So she always had to go bird dog, find this, find that, always harassing the lawyer to give her more information. A lot of times the information wasn't provided in the correct order, and she'd get all the way to the end and get another little piece of information, make her go back and change everything over again. Like, that's an example of that, that's just a process glitch. Then after the documents were drafted, there was one lawyer who was really concerned about the language, and she insisted on reviewing every single set of documents, even when they weren't her clients, before they would go out. And she was always bottlenecked and couldn't keep up with that. And she wanted to do it, but didn't have time to do it, and was angry because she couldn't keep up. And so that slowed down the process on the back end. And then there was line jumping, and people would schedule the signing conferences before their documents were done and then tell them they had to move up so they would get in front of, there's all kinds of, I could give you 15 minutes of all the glitches that were with the process. So in order for them to get gains, they had to go back and re-examine how the whole thing starts and ends and everything in between. And the only one step of that was the drafting. And if you don't look at it from a bigger picture, you end up in that same space. So the bad system beats a good person every time.
Just a quick comment, sort of tangentially related, but it just brought up a point that I think may help a lot of you. We find that we often will have 95% of the drafting information, and we're waiting on the name of somebody to be a trust protector, and the client just can't think of who to name. What we do, and we use Interactive, we draft the documents, and what I do is I just put in all capital letters, so it's easy to spot in the document, need name, and we generate the document, we send it to the client, and the client now has the document in their lap. What I find will often get a client to the finish line faster than anything is when you review a document and they see the provision, so they see what this person they haven't named yet does. It's a lot easier for them to make a decision and just wrap it up. So a lot of times that's just a simple way to get it to the end. But I feel the pain of this person who was like, had 95% of the information and couldn't really draft. We just get it out the door because it puts it in the client's lap. We're moving forward, and it really eases the decision making by the client. Baron?
I was going to just pop in here and say, so just wanted to make just another point on distinguishing between automation of documents and processes, because preparing the documents is just part of a big process, right? An estate plan is an initial client contacts you. That's part of the process. You run a conflicts check. That's part of the process. You set up a file. That's part of the process. And so, one of the ones and then we have a process map later on this, but we've actually, say, with entity formation, and that was because I got tired of my clients, and not my clients, actually, I picked up some clients. So we have like a form-your-own-business.com where you can basically form your own entity. And that's a process that we've automated entirely that includes time entries for our lawyers will pop up automatically. So you can have an automated email that goes to the Secretary of State for clearing the name. So if you take your process and lay it out, it's, and so the documents is just one piece of that process. So we run a conflicts check, we open a file, we send a name clearance to Secretary of State. All that happens automatically. But again, the basis of that is you have to figure out what the entire process is. And if the process is a mess, which even as much as I tend to think I'm fairly process oriented, every time we review one of these, we're like, oh, why are we doing that? And if it's because we've always done it that way, that's the process to totally reevaluate.
Yeah, and when we're doing these kind of process analyses, we often put it into a spreadsheet initially. And the spreadsheet will have a row for each step in the process. And then there's 4 columns out to the right of that. And so you describe the step, and then there's 4 columns to the right. And it's the minimum number of minutes of support staff, maximum number of minutes of support staff, minimum and maximum for the lawyer time. And we want to know, how long does something take on the best day, and how long does it take on the worst day? And sometimes the variance alone is a red flag. Like sometimes it takes 30 minutes and sometimes it takes 90. Why on earth could it take 90 minutes? So those raise red flags, and it helps people go back and figure out what the problem is. The other thing it always reveals is the lawyer is never responsible for all the steps. There's other people involved in that, and there's a disconnect, and they're like, why is that taking so long, or what steps are you using? And people, we find this almost every time. There's a glitch. The tools they're using don't work correctly, or something's broken, and they haven't complained about it in years. They've just accepted the glitch. And even they got all these workarounds, and like there's a way it should have occurred, and then the way it's actually occurring. And they no longer remember how it was supposed to have worked because it hasn't worked that way in so long. And the problem is they don't say anything about it. They're not complaining. And so no one's aware that there's this giant bottleneck in the process. And then when someone else looks at it and goes, okay, look, we have got to take the time to get this resolved. I know you've got these workarounds. I know you've been doing this for a long time, but we could save, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And that, when you add it all up, it's often shocking. The reason we do the minimum and the maximum, we take the average and we figure out what's the total average number of hours involved with sports staff and the average number involved with lawyer. And then you can figure out, okay, what's our effective blended hourly rate if we're charging a flat fee? And that often is offensive when they see what the actual number is. They were expecting it to be a lot more profitable than it actually is, but they never actually sat down and looked at all the time. In order to do that, by the way, you do have to track all your time. Everybody has to track all their time, and that always push back on that, but it's the only way to know.
I'm going to make one of what will be many shameless plugs for Baron. So with people working in a remote environment, and we see this, it's almost entertaining, I hate to say, colleagues that have never really handled any administrative type things. And now that they're working remotely and don't have administrative staff all around them, they're struggling to get some of the most basic things done. If you're struggling, or anyone in your firm is struggling in this remote environment, hire Baron to come in as a consultant and look at the process, because it's very likely the process never worked efficiently, but because you were in an office surrounded by administrative and support staff, you just got through it, and you as the attorney were never, or the professional, were never aware of what was really going on behind the scenes. So if things are a struggle now, I would suggest that's a good sign that you got a process problem. Have Baron come in, figure out what the better way to do it is, because this is not going to be the end of the remote work. As Jonathan said earlier, in the near term, we're all going to be working half the time probably at home. And the COVID, we may have a resurgence in the fall. They've already talked about that. And if it's not that, or even if it is that, we're going to have something else in a year or 2 or 5. You may as well get the processes right so you can work in any environment. Baron, let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, and by the way, you don't need me to do it. This is often a DIY thing. It's just you got to get everybody to record how much time it's taking them. A lot of times they don't know what their minimum and maximum amount of minutes are because they haven't tracked their time on it. So there's some, anybody can say, okay, from now on, we're going to track our time. We're going to enter all of it. We're going to put it into a spreadsheet. And if you want a sample spreadsheet that illustrates that, I'm happy to send you one. Shoot me an email. So
I'm going to disagree with you, Baron. I think having an independent consultant is a really valuable thing to do, because it's really hard when you're on the inside and you've worked in a firm for years and years, and the old shoe is comfortable and you're used to it. When you have somebody from the outside come in, they're going, what? Baron?
Well,
I'm going to agree with Marty on this. And as somebody who works with Baron and several members of his group, what I've always appreciated is the objectivity, and that it doesn't matter whether, which particular software I use. A lot of consultants are tied to and know a certain type of software. With Baron's group, it hasn't mattered who I work to. And I've always kind of, from the perspective of a law firm managing partner, I want to know how they put the group of people together that they did, because it's very rare to meet a group that has such expertise and functions the way that they do overall. So I can tell you, I routinely consult with Baron and actually others at Affinity as well. But I do want to talk about what processes we should automate, because it's not everything, right, Baron? Some people say every process should be automated. And this talks about the common mistakes. But the other thing I would add in there is, one of the things where we started evaluating processes to automate is that we'd hire somebody new, and 3 or 4 months later, we realized they didn't know how to do something, whatever it might be. You know, they didn't actually know what our process for an estate plan windup was or something like that. And we're like, oh, so it's common mistakes, and what you're figuring out, people still don't know how to do for the most part, but it's not everything, right?
Yeah, and you know, the important part of this is establishing the way you're, you know, like we call it the Affinity way. We have all of our processes are written down, and when we bring somebody in new, we hire somebody new, they bring with them however they did that thing at the last place they worked. And in a vacuum, they'll go back to that just because that's what they know. But being able to hand them something or lay something out and say, here's how we do it. Here's the steps that we follow. And it doesn't matter, even simple things, if there's more than 3 steps, you can skip a step, you can miss a step. People make that mistake all the time. So you make them follow through with the checklist, you make them follow through with and it's also part of the culture that you develop in the how we do stuff here. And it becomes, you know, and then you've got something also that you can improve over time because now it's written down. It's just like, it's the same concept of using a template. I've got something now, it's not just a good starting point, it's also something I can improve and feed. And if you're recycling old documents, which, you know, that's still the way most documents get drafted, unfortunately, you got nothing to improve. You're just taking the last thing you did and throwing some stuff in and taking some stuff out, but there's nowhere to put the good stuff you want to hang on to.
Baron, do you really is that really still true that most documents are drafted by taking an existing document?
I would say 90% of documents in legal are drafted that way.
Wow.
If somebody gives me an answer different than that, I'm surprised, and I ask every single time.
Wow.
No, Baron, I know that's true. In fact, when I began practicing, because there was no word processing whatsoever, you would get an assignment, and typically the partner would tell you the client for whom he or she had done the most comparable document. And they'd say, go get the will of Mary Smith or of John Jones and mark that up. And then it would be typed by hand. And documents were significantly shorter than they are today because they were so long to do, so common there would be mistakes. And in a will, you can't have any corrections whatsoever. At least that's what the practice was in those days. So word processing is an extraordinary advance. And one of my now gone Milbank partners, Fran Musselman, was the one who developed word processing. And he had tremendous pushback from IBM to get them to do it, and tremendous pushback from the bar, who again wanted to do it their way, the way they'd always done it. That's one of the biggest problems that law firms face in trying to come into the modern age. They're caught in a paradigm, they do it a particular way, and law firms are extremely conservative in making changes.
Yeah, and one point about the, okay.
I wanted to just comment on the repeatability and predictability of processes that you should automate. Again, I'm just kind of moving from documents, but some people will say like, oh, every document I draft is unique. I just really don't think, right? I really think like, okay, you might put some unique words in each document, but the process of creating the document, even from opening, gathering the client information and that, those are repeatable and predictable processes. And how you're going to like set up your estate plan file, most lawyers do it, whether it's electronically or by paper, exactly the same way every time. Those are repeatable and predictable processes. Those that aren't predictable and repeatable are, like raising children. I don't think there's a formula that, if you have 4 kids, I don't think the same formula is going to apply to all. but I haven't found that many processes in my office that aren't repeatable and predictable. I'm just going to ask Baron, are there any that you've run into like that? What process would you look at and say, this is a process I wouldn't bother to automate?
I mean, I think every process is worth documenting. Sometimes they can't be automated. They just need to be made clearer, and the steps need to be laid out. You know, if it's a really short thing, it might not be worth messing with. But even the simplest things, we did a project for a firm in Florida where once the documents were signed, they kept the original will and copies of the trust, and they put it down in a fireproof vaults, these filing cabinets down in the basement of their office. And that process alone took between 30 and 90 minutes, just the process of making the copies, putting the envelope, making the label, recording the information, and sticking it in a filing cabinet. And I was like, I told the lawyer, I was like, yeah, you've got, she's like, can you help us? I'm like, well, yeah. She goes, give me an example. I'm like, well, it takes up to 90 minutes to vault your documents. And she goes, no, it doesn't. And I said, I just interviewed the lady who's been doing it for you for 17 years. And she says it takes that long sometimes. She's like, what? So like she literally, she didn't believe it. And we had to go back down the hall before I walked out the door and confirm that I wasn't exaggerating. But again, the disconnect. And you think something like that, like how many steps are involved in creating a label and recording the information? But you never know.
When we went paperless, that was a wondrous surprise to me. When we finally got rid of our last physical document, our last will, the last paper we had, it was amazing to me how much administrative time just disappeared. And it was just like you described, Baron. It was like off radar, had no idea how much time was spent on it. And there's even lawyer time beyond the time of the people processing it, because inevitably every couple of documents or so, there's a question, there's an issue or name or how to do it. It was absolutely incredible. Being completely and totally paperless really solves an awful lot. As to checklists, one of the things that I would think people might suggest are hard, or they might even think impossible to create a process or document the process for, is a more complex, large estate planning transaction. If you're doing a note sale to a grantor trust with defined value mechanisms with a spillover to a GRAT, can you really document that? And the answer is absolutely yes. And what we've done, we started creating in probably 2010 or 2011. And then in 2012, with the massive amount of slats and other irrevocable trusts that were created, we really made this like standard process. Is we created a checklist for the closing for a document or a transaction like that, and a checklist. The same checklist became the table of contents for the organization of all the documents. We used to do it physically with actual loose leaf binders, and now it's just we number the PDFs that way. But having a checklist is indispensable. And in fact, over the years, as we've done more complex transactions and more of them, those checklists have gotten more and more detailed, and we've started even to color code them so that every different law firm, accounting firm, trust company that's involved in the transaction can immediately look and see not only exactly what they have to do and what they're responsible for, but how it fits into the big picture. So even things that feel like they're one-off or unique transactions, you can template them. And we have a starting template that we created a form for that we used. I'm sure Baron or Mary have a better way to automate even that process, but it's just a simple Word document with automatic numbering, and it's incredible how valuable that is in getting a large, complex deal done.
And that's all it takes.
Having that checklist, because without the checklist, you can't automate. So if you can't organize the steps, and that's what a lot of people do, is they'll buy software trying to solve the problem that they don't know what the problem is, right? So my theory's always been whether the transaction is complex or simple. And my mother always said, well, if you can read, you can do anything. So what I've always wanted to have in my practice was I'm going to push things down to the least expensive. It's as you go through, it's like, hey, I'm the only person that's still working with me after all the years I've been doing this. So if I bring a new paralegal in, I want he or she to be able to learn. And so if you have a checklist that says, hey, this is step A, this is step B, this is step C, whether the transaction is complex or simple, It's do A, do B, do C. The first time they do that, all they have to do is be able to read the list and follow it. They might not know what a particular provision, and on our checklist we have include, this particular provision, and the attorney can put a little X by it. But when you have everything automated, you can just give them on your checklist directions to do X, Y, or Z, so that if they follow that checklist and do A, do B, do C, they can basically get anything done. The first time they have no idea what they're doing. The second time they pick up a piece or two. The third time they're starting to get a little bit of comprehension of what they're doing. But the bottom line is you can have a useful new paralegal on day one.
Mary, what do you use to automate a checklist like that?
So we are using our practice management system. And as we actually flow through here, so I'm, again, the checklist person. Others prefer the process map. And the example I use, because it's actually complete in our house, is the entity formation process. And so that's for me, and I always talk to people about when they're picking a practice management system, it has to be very specific to your personal style. So people will often ask, what's the best practice management system? And the answer is, that depends. It should accommodate how you work. Because if you buy a practice management system like I don't litigate, I mean, I do tax court appeals, but that's the only, I don't actually do the tax court level work. So for me, a litigation focused practice management system is a waste of time. I'm also have the accounting and finance background. So a lot of the practice management systems have really poor accounting systems that make me laugh. So for me, it had to make sense, but that's what I use is our practice management system is got some pretty heavy where you can create workflows and things like that. It integrates with Hot Docs, which was a big benefit to me since we had most of our stuff automated in Hot Docs. So we created little screens where we can have, if we bring in an estate plan, we put all the information in this screen about the client, and that integrates into our various documents in the estate plan that are in Hot Docs.
Yeah, and to underscore what Mary just said, the program that Mary used, I know the case management and accounting program Mary uses, and we've got a client in California that does insurance defense, and they are on the struggle bus with that exact same program that you're having great success with. They're like, this doesn't work for us. And just to underscore the point, there is no, this is the one that works for everybody. It's dependent upon a bunch of variables, and you got to do your homework to make sure you pick the right one, because it can be a very unpleasant marriage otherwise.
And I was just going to say, because the other thing is I wanted data. When Barron talks about knowing the cost, we require everybody. I want to know every cent that goes into the estate plan. So that's one of the reasons there's no such thing as a secretary or administrative assistant that we don't treat as a cost related to the estate plan, because we want to know every cent that went into touching that plan, including if we use some paper, because that's the only way I can know whether a flat fee is profitable. So we have everybody that touches any piece of the estate planning process, starting with the intake phone call, keep track of that time. And we have our practice management system structured so that we can track estate plans of different types and know how much went into a simple estate plan versus a more complex trust drafting type software. So I'm just avid about knowing true cost, and you don't know the true cost unless you pay attention to every piece of
it. Barron, let's go on.
Okay. So the important thing here is you're looking at how it's actually being done compared to how it should be done. And a process map, you don't have to use these kind of extra applications. Like a lot of times we just do it in Word, or you can do it in Excel. But if you want a graphical representation of it, then Lucidchart or SmartDraw, or Lucidchart is web-based, SmartDraw is both. You can get a software you can install, or it's a web-based option as well. And as an ancillary, a lot of people use those to map out the flow of an estate plan for clients. I know some people do that in PowerPoint, which I would view to be a horrible tool for that particular thing. And SmartDraw actually has estate planning sample template workflows that you can start with. So both of those options are definitely worth checking out.
So we included in here just a super simple checklist to say any process is like Baron said, okay, do you automate this process? And actually we do have this process automated. We're just opening a matter. But this was just to say, hey, kind of give you an example of what the, how making a checklist in a really simple format that fit into a couple slides. But you can probably just click through those couple slides and go to the process map, which is a couple more away.
Is this
And
it
so
on 18?
now I might go one more and let Baron just talk about how that looks.
What did you use to create that with? Do you remember?
So yeah, you have to have Spirit Lourish. That was her. So what does she usually use?
Oh, Lucidchart probably.
Yeah, I think that's a Lucidchart.
Yeah. And they're surprisingly easy to do and connect the dots and move things around and maintain the arrow connections and everything. Because a lot of times, obviously, you're going to be tweaking your process. Like what you map out first probably isn't what you're going to end up with. So you need that flexibility.
And we actually ultimately built a lot more details into this. This was just kind of, again, something that fit on the slides and made it look simple. But sometimes we will actually take the process, and this is where the one place we still use paper sometimes is sticky notes on the wall that we move around to get the process right.
Yeah. And that's a continuation of it. Good stuff.
Paperless. One of you want to comment? You want me to start?
Go ahead, Marty.
So my paperless process began in, I think it was 2010 or 2011, after hearing Jonathan speak at Heckerling about the office of the future. I don't know what mesmerized me or how I drank the Kool-Aid, but I did. I went back and was on a tear to go paperless. The first thing that I did in going paperless, and I'm happy to share it. We have a sanitized version that we can make available. If you email me, shankman@shankmanlaw.com, we'll send it to you. Is I sat down and wrote a memo of what I wanted to do with all the files that we had. Apart from files in our office, which were massive, we had, I think, 550, I don't know if my hands get on the screen, legal size dead storage boxes. So I wrote a detailed set of instructions for what I wanted done with every dead storage box. I was afraid to scan everything, not only because it would have been very costly, but because if I had 550 crates of stuff scanned, the amount of hits that would come up every time you searched anything would be ridiculous. And I also felt if I'm going to do it, I need to do it right. So one of the things, for example, is any client property. We never held client property other than original documents that were held in special file cabinets like the one Baron described with the 90 minutes of processing. But I think in the 550 crates of stuff, we may have found 20 documents that somehow an original got through and got to offsite storage. Any original documents were scanned in the office manually and returned to the client so that we could document that. And then certain documents we kept, and I made a list of which documents we'd keep for clients so that we could have people go through it and select those out. Other documents were sent back to clients, other documents merely shredded. And we used an independent company that came in every time we had 10 legal files of documents to scan. They would pick them up, scan them, and bring us back a DVD, which we loaded onto our hard drive. And ultimately, it's now all sitting in net documents where it's snug like a bug, and Baron can comment on net documents. But we manually went through every document to do it. We also started, and I believe Baron has said this before, we started just scanning. And this is what, if you're not fully paperless, just do this now. Get a scanner on everybody's desk. And frankly, now in this day and age, scanner in every professional's home, in anyone's home that's working at home. Everyone should have a scanner. Scan anything you touch. If you get a piece of paper because some physical mail gets sent to you, scan it. Scan everything going forward. If you start scanning going forward and separately start working on the other paper, you will eventually end up paperless. We focused first on the paper in our office. We scanned everything new. Once that was under control and we were comfortable because that was more manageable, we then started scanning and getting rid of the existing files in the office. And when that was done, we went through the off-site storage, which was a massive, costly process, but got us there. The fourth piece to going paperless was original documents. And those, we had a form letter that modified for every client. When we returned original documents, we had a staff person that spent years, literally years, tracking down on the internet every person. And I cannot tell you, I was absolutely shocked that we actually found every person or a surviving person or a named executor to return every document to. And we managed over several years of time to do it. And when we returned the original documents, I did it at my expense. I didn't want to hear arguments from anybody. We sent everything back. I think we used post office with tracking because it was much less expensive than the commercial services. And we returned every document. We tracked and scanned every receipt to prove that we sent it back. And everyone got a cover letter that listed each document that we returned. And we put in that form of the cover letter, which then I modified for probably most of the people. But we started with the form basically advising that if the documents were old and outdated, they need to come in and update them, so on and so forth. And that was costly and time consuming, but it's been incredibly valuable because we still get calls several times a month from somebody who says, you have mom's will. Well, no, we actually returned it to you in 2011, and here's, I'll forward you the letter, and I just email them the letter, and either they become a client or it disappears, but it solves the problem. But it was also important to me because I didn't want to just return really old documents and have somebody then later say, well, you should have told me it was outdated. So that was pretty easy to build into the form letter, because anything in this day and age, anything before December of last year with the Secure Act is probably outdated and needs to be looked at. So it's not hard to make the case and point out why people need to come in and have things updated. So we went through and manually did it. We tracked the time as non-chargeable to everyone because I wanted records of it all. And I would estimate that we spent minimum $750 per file of total staff and lawyer time returning those documents. It was probably the biggest expense of my life other than my home. And but it revolutionized my practice. Like Baron pointed out, it is amazing how much administrative time is spent, and not just by administrative staff, but even lawyers, and it never gets really tracked, just dealing with the papers and the documents and someone calling asking for a tax ID number or asking for mom's old will and so on. So that's what we did. But it starts really simple. Get a scanner on every person's desk and every person's home if they're working from home, which we're all doing now, and just start scanning everything going forward. That'll start the process. And once you get your toes wet, it's easy to do. I always call it the swimming pool approach. When I tackle anything new, especially technologically, it's daunting, it's intimidating. I don't have that technological gene that Baron and Mary have. So I like to dip my toe in, then my foot, then my leg. And if you just buy a scanner and start, you're there.
Marty, let me ask you
to do is get the well-designed document management system. So first you have to do it, Marty. Do you have to make a decision that everything on a go-forward basis is paperless? And there's always all kinds of ways to deal with the old paper and the documentation of what you do with it. But what when I first went paperless, which has been like 15 years or so at this point in time, what I had is older lawyers who were carrying around things, and then you had younger lawyers who had never seen an actual file. You have to get buy-in and consistent use because everybody has to be able to find the same things. And I have some lawyers who use a document management system and they use the search tool and they don't know that there's file folders that underlie the search. And so you've got to take into account in designing your system. And so that's where I like super consistency. And several of the questions I got, because I took the position, we don't allow miscellaneous anything. We don't allow miscellaneous in the name of a file. We don't allow it in the name of a matter. We don't allow anything to be saved. And we actually run a search for the word miscellaneous. And if we find somebody like violated that somehow without our knowledge, then we actually make it the subject of a meeting, because the miscellaneous means I don't really know what to do with this. And so we're like, well, if we don't know what to do with something, then let's figure it out and have a system so that we can all find the same things.
One quick point on backfile conversion, which a lot of firms have a whole bunch of closed files, and if you want to capture all those electronically, there are of course companies that you can outsource all of that to, and they'll charge you buy the banker's box, and then there's a labor charge on top of that because they got to take out the paper clips and the staples. But we have found the last probably 3 or 4 times we've crunched the numbers for someone, for a law firm, it was actually, in most cases, significantly less expensive for them to do it themselves, even including the cost of the hardware, like buying a really fast scanner. And what a lot of them do, they'd say, I got a college kid home for the summer, and I'm going to pay them, $15 an hour to sit in my office with their headphones on and churn and burn on all my old files. And that was way less expensive than outsourcing it. Plus, there's more control over the process. And when it's all done, you've got a really sweet scanner that you can use going forward. So I think that's kind of surprising. You would think it would be cheaper to outsource it. It often is the opposite.
I think when we did it 10 years ago, it was a bit different. Jonathan, sorry.
Yeah, let me ask you a question, which Marty, you briefly mentioned, but that is destroying documents. Having a shredder. And I want to ask Baron and Mary and you, Marty, in particular. There are 2 types of shredders, I understand. One that cuts it into strips, and another which does pieces. Ethically, does the lawyer have to ensure it's in the smallest possible pieces before it's placed out in a garbage can?
Best practices is the confetti shredders, but honestly, shredders are noisy. They're dirty. They make paper dust. You got to empty them. They're a pain in the butt, really. The shredding services, like we have these big bins in our office that are locked, and you just keep putting stuff in there, and when stuff falls back out on the floor, it's full. And we call them, and they come and they take it out, and they've got this huge shredder truck, and they destroy all the paper in our parking lot. It's super loud, but it's confidentially destroyed and then recycled, and that is, I think, way easier and less burdensome than having little shredders under everybody's desks. And you can actually witness the process. And here's just a totally aside. My wife is an investment advisor, and they were going to have a shredding party for their clients on a Saturday of a college football game Saturday, and they had a food truck come in with brats and drinks, and they're like, yeah, we're going to invite all of our clients to come in, and we're going to have the shredder truck there, and they can bring whatever they want to have shredded. And I thought, I'm not sure that's a super good idea. It was packed. Like, they had the parking lot full. Everybody was having a great time. They brought, all their old tax records and stuff they wanted to get rid of. They, how many people have that stuff queued up in their basement or in their attic? And it turned out to be quite a good client event. So just something to think about, a shredding party. Who knew?
Well, I know that the Cintas company, which is originally a uniform cleaning company out of Cincinnati, does that. I've seen their trucks going around. Yeah, I don't know what it costs, but you're right. It certainly would be simpler and not as disruptive in the office.
Well, we did when we went through the massive initial process of going paperless in, I think, 2010 or 11 and 12. For the couple years we went through the process, we used, I'll name the company because they were great, Shred It. We had boxes all over the office with the locks, just like Baron described, and they would fill up faster than one could imagine. We'd call them, they'd come with the big noisy truck, they'd deal with it all, they were bonded, they locked everything, they gave me a certificate that they did it. When we finished going paperless, we just bought some inexpensive shredders online. I have one at home, one at work, and we don't really need much more than that, because at this point in time, we generate so much less paper than we ever did that I don't know that I'd be filling up a box very often. And I think that I actually was very proud when I was able to go and order a shredder for my office, because it told me we had actually succeeded in the process of going paperless because we had so little paper left to shred. Let's go on, folks. Baron, why don't you talk about the hardware? And let me just ask you a question to start. Lots of people are working from home for the first time. I said it several times. Every firm, whatever discipline they're in, everybody should have a scanner on their desk and a scanner at home. Is there one specific type of scanner you might recommend as a default for somebody to get to use at home that's good quality but not too monstrous in terms of size or complexity?
Yeah, the Fujitsu IX 1500, which you can buy on Amazon. It works Windows or Mac. Small sheet fed. Yeah, ScanSnap. and it's fantastic, easy to use, amazing software. Doesn't matter what kind of computer you have. It has every tool, scans front and back simultaneously, automatically deletes blank pages, automatically detects paper size, automatically detects color, black and white, automatically detects if you scanned it upside down and makes it right side up, and has wireless capability. So $3.99, I think it is on Amazon right now, and they're just wonderful little devices.
Yeah, I had to ask you that because one of the signs of remote working is my wife has banned me from using her scanner at this point. So I have to get my own.
Well, there's an excuse. There's an excuse. That's all you need is the excuse. Multiple monitors is it turned out to be one of the common denominators because you need to see two things at once or three things at once electronically, and that prevents people from having to print things so they can look at it while they're drafting something, for example. And then, of course, mobile hardware so you can take the electronic file with you to a conference room or home or wherever. But ultimately, if you're analog, it's not very shareable and you don't have remote access.
And just as an example, based on the first webinar we did with Baron some weeks ago, I bought an ASUS portable monitor that is plugged into my Dell laptop right now. And that's how we're bringing you this broadcast. So
how do you like that?
Not only does this all work, but I heed Baron's advice. And I told you I was going to make a lot of shameless plugs for Baron. I've already booked a consult with Baron to go over the list of notes that I've taken on each webinar I've done with him, and I'm going to have him help me do all these things. So this stuff is real, and we do it too. Mary and Jonathan and I, we all do this stuff. Jonathan, didn't you get a curved monitor based on Baron's recommendation?
Absolutely. I'm going to install it later today or tomorrow.
So
yeah,
once you go curved,
we listen to Baron too.
Once you go curved, you never go back.
Well, Marty, as you know, I was one of the first ones to say we've got to do better things in the office and stuff. But I'll tell a little bit of this story. One of the retired Millbank partners had a pretty serious problem, and he called me, and I solved it for him. And he was profusive with his thanks, but he said, "I've got a confession." He said, "When you came here, you used to push us to adopt more and more technology, and you didn't know it. But I did everything I could behind your back to prevent that from happening." He said, "This is true." He said, "Now I realize that if I had adopted even part of what you were saying that the firm would do, I would have been a more efficient lawyer and been able to do a better job for my clients." And everybody on the phone has to think about that. It's not just, yeah, it's simpler for you, you can make more money. But I think all of us, our goal is to do the best job we possibly can for our clients. And the more technologically savvy you are, the better job you're going to be able to do.
Not only is that true, but to me, that's really the heart of all of this. Because what I have found is this painful, costly, time-consuming process of going paperless has enabled me to function much more efficiently for every client and do many tasks at almost insignificant charge compared to what it used to be. I can also tell you that over the years of getting more and more tech steps advanced in our practice, it enables us to spend more time thinking, which is really what we all went into the profession to do, to help people and to think. We wouldn't be working as lawyers or accountants, whatever. We're in a service profession. We want to help people, and we like creativity. We like thinking. We don't like doing routine tasks. The stuff that Mary talked to you about, brilliant ways that she automates tasks. None of us want to sit down and crank out something for the 114th time. But when you can use technology, you can focus on the creativity, the thinking, really helping clients and giving better service. And it's really incredible. And that's what all these tools do, all of them.
Not to mention the reduction in the real estate costs because you don't have to include a file room in your floor plans if you go back to the office.
And now I only had a couple of bookcases left, and I don't even think I don't know what to do with those anymore. Baron,
They're haunted still, you can still sell them to banks.
Oh, Baron, you want to talk about scanners in any greater detail
Well,
on slide 23?
All of these are met by the ScanSnap IX 1500. So it has everything you would want. And that's just if you try one of those, if you don't have a scanner or you don't have a desktop scanner, you will love that one.
And by the way, what Barron said is what we did when we went paperless, and I wish I had known Barron back then because he could have told me, but we bought a scan snap for every desk in the office, lawyers as well as admins, because this was not supposed to be an admin test. Everybody scans. And we had a giant, very expensive scanner that initially back then was on lease and now not. And now that we've really gone paperless, I guess our large scanner copy printer can do all that, but for the most part, we use the scan snaps on everyone's desk because there's so little paper at this point. And that only happens when somebody doesn't listen to us and sends us paper instead of sending everything by email. And I know Mary has been more successful than me in getting everyone to send everything electronically in the first place. And we're working towards that goal, but some of that's out of our control. But it's absolutely a workhorse, the scan snap, and incredibly easy to use.
Yeah, and it does 30 pages a minute single-sided and 60 double-sided, so it's not a dog. I mean, it's pretty quick. And that's just, I think we already mentioned this, you know, when we look at all the law firms and legal departments we've worked with that have had success in reducing paper and relying on electronic files, one of those common denominators was distributed scanning, which just means I don't want to make people get up to scan stuff. I want to make them get up to print things, but I would like them to remain seated if all they need to do is scan. Because we want to encourage that.
So I just want to pipe in there because I'm the exception. We've never allowed most of our lawyers to scan their own stuff because we haven't always trusted them to do it. So what we would find is sometimes lawyers would like still have the stuff piled there days later that needed to be in. So we like have a scan as it comes in the door policy. And if there's too much coming in the door, then we, evaluate why that's coming in the door. So we actually have somebody trained with the incoming mail to scan and distribute, so the mail gets distributed electronically. If they still want the paper, they can have it, but then we kind of monitor and go around and shred it unless there's some reason to maintain it. And we've gone to, like now with COVID, there's very little that gets distributed anymore. We've tried various times with like having the paralegals that serve certain lawyers take care of the scanning, but we found for us, just again, to be slightly different from that everyone else, that it's most effective for us to distribute it when it comes, or to scan it when it comes in the door.
Flatbeds?
These are flatbeds. If you need a flatbed, this is a couple of good options for that. Wildly different price points because of the speed difference. There's the Scan Snap. It actually is $3.99 right now on Amazon. So it fluctuates between $3.99 and $4.19. And right now it's at the good end of that spectrum. The other two are similar scanners, but I would recommend among the three, the Scan Snap, hands down. As you step up in speed, you step up in price, roughly the same size scanners here. And I really like the 7160 in particular. I think that's a really good bang for the buck, getting 60, 120 pages per minute. And the price also goes up and down. I've seen it in the 7s before, but that's not terrible considering how fast it is. Got to have a good PDF program. You're going to be creating PDFs, manipulating PDFs, locking down PDFs, cleaning metadata out of PDFs, and that means the free software isn't going to work. But you could get Acrobat, you could get Power PDF, you could get Nitro, you could get Foxit Phantom. There's a lot of good choices today. So PDFs are the only files that you can be guaranteed you'll be able to open in 20 years, and that's why they're the foundation of all paper reduction systems and all the electronic case filing systems and all the forms, et cetera. It's an open source. Adobe released their patent rights to this standard in 2008. So it's a PDF is a PDF. It doesn't matter what program was used to create it.
When you get ScanSnap, any of the software you need is already built in, is it not?
Yeah, they have different PDF bundles now. I saw they've got a new one coming out where they're going to actually bundle a 1-year subscription to Adobe Acrobat for a really great deal compared to what it would normally be. But by default, it comes with Power PDF, which I honestly like better than Acrobat, even though I teach both of those. Power PDF to me is more intuitive and does more of the functionality is accessible to someone who's just looking at it and doesn't want to have to read a manual.
And by the way, apropos to many of us are still working remotely, and depending where you are in the country, you may continue to work remotely for a while. And as Jonathan said, I think that's going to be in part the wave of the future. However, whenever coronavirus is resolved, is to continue to some degree working remotely. If you don't have these capabilities at home or wherever you're quarantined, go online, you buy it, you order it, it's shipped to you, and literally with ScanSnap, you plug it in when it comes out of the box and you're ready to roll. You can do all of this now. You don't have to wait to get anybody to help you, and you don't have to wait to get back in your office to do any of this. Just start today. And if you need help, I called Barron. I booked an appointment online with him, and I have an appointment where he's going to walk me through some of the stuff that I just thought would be more efficient for him to walk me through than me figuring out on my own. And you can get consultants online to help you. They remote into your laptop, your desktop at home, and they can help you set up any of this stuff. So no need to defer any of this.
Just the takeaway here is, if you use a copier to make PDFs, it's very likely that they only have the image layer and don't also have the layer of text. If you make a PDF from Word or WordPerfect or an email or a spreadsheet, you always get two layers. You get the photograph layer on top and you get the text underneath, so that you can find it again when you're doing a full text search. Just make sure that whatever method you're using to create PDFs, if you're using a scanner or a copier, that you are getting that extra process run that buries the text underneath so that you can find it again by the words contained inside. All the desktop scanners we previously showed you do this. Most copiers do not. So just be aware of that. If you want a document management system, here are the big players in legal. And the one that has only ever been web-based is NetDocuments. Like all the other four listed here were originally server-based applications, and now they have online options that you can add to their software. But NetDocuments is pretty far out in front of everyone because that's the only thing they ever did. And they're quite good at it. So if you want to have a completely web-based, very, very, very secure document management system accessible from anywhere, definitely worth checking out.
And if you're sending couriers to and from your office, as many of our colleagues are doing now while working remotely, it ain't the way to fly. Get on NetDocs, get everything scanned, get it up in the cloud. You can access it. You don't have to worry about couriers going back and forth. I've actually been surprised how many colleagues have told me that even when they're not supposed to be in their office, they're going in their office, and how many have told me that they have couriers bringing files back and forth because they're so mired in a paper environment. Very surprised. Make the transition, get started.
Yeah, the sooner you start, the sooner it's going to be complete. It's always that will come. You say, well, it would take us a year. It would take us 2 years. Well, guess what? In a year, it's going to be a year. In 2 years, it's going to be 2 years. And you can either be stuck in a paper morass, or you can be pretty paperless by that time. And as Mary and Marty and I discussed in a recent article that was in Limeberg, maybe you can't get completely paperless, but you certainly can get paperless, which is going to save you a lot of time and money. And Mary, I love the idea of having everything that comes in scanned immediately. I know it's never happened in Marty's office or in your prior office, Mary, but every once in a while, a document would get lost between the time it came into the mailroom and by the time it went around and finally wound up on the lawyer's desk, and then the lawyer looks for it, and he swears he never saw it, but somehow he knows about it. Well, if you've had it scanned, you're going to be able to retrieve it no matter what. I think that's a great idea.
Well, we had a couple situations where somebody had a timely document that just got put in the wrong person's pile as well, right? So we have a whole process that as we scan that as it comes in, it gets emailed, and there's actually a check process that goes into place to make sure it got saved in the right place and forwarded to the right people. So at least 2 people I always see to make sure it goes to the right place. This next slide is actually, so one of the things is I designed our document management system, and we used World Docs. They are the ones who worked with us at the time. But what we have is an underlying folder system. So if you're not going document management, you can still do this with like Word folders. And my attorneys that didn't come from the file folder world will never know that these files exist. But this, like, is the client name, then there's a matter name, and this is sort of our kind of a basic one that we used for, a starter estate plan because it fit on the slide. But so the client name gets a number, and then we always have, the estate planning with a breakdown. Signed original documents is always separate because those are the documents that are going to go into the portal. And so we have a process for how those all get named. If you go on to the next one, we also use consistent naming conventions. And so for every document, we don't want somebody to refer to something as estate plan and somebody else estate planning. We don't want somebody to name, a document living trust while somebody else names it trust for, so we just create conventions. And if you click to the next slide, we actually have those conventions built into our document management system. So what happens here is you cannot skip any of these fields when you save a document in our system. And by the way, you cannot save it locally. We won't let it happen. And so to the extent, we just won't even allow bypasses of the document management, except on my computer, we allow mine. But so here you have to enter the client, which is, you can search by number or name. So if you're still like it alphabetically, we still use an alphabetical approach as well as numbering. So you can search either way. Matter will pop up when you get the client. The files that we just showed on a previous screen will show up when you click on that right arrow. The document type, when you get there, you just go over to the quick profiles there on the left, and all those document naming conventions will pop up for your document type. So you pick it, you might have to fill in a few things. That's going to go down in the description line, then you okay. And that indexes so that it's actually in an underlying folder system. So again, that's always my thing is people that work here will oh my gosh, World Docs is down. It doesn't really matter. You can just go click through your little folder on the bottom and find the documents just as you could. And I came up with this design after working at a big law firm who just let all kinds of miscellaneous stuff get saved all over, which meant that the documents for a client file were not necessarily in the same place and they are named whatever. And so your chances of finding everything when you did a search were near impossible, and in my opinion, possible malpractice exposure if you can't find everything in the client file. So
a really important aspect of that, if you back up one slide, the reason this is really good is because there's no open text fields. Those are all multiple choice. So if you allow people to file stuff and let them type whatever they want, you'll never find anything again. And if you instead limit it to a multiple choice, here's your choices, pick something, then you'll find it again. That seems like an insignificant thing, but it's actually really important.
Aaron?
Well, you got to do something with your email. So if you have a document management system, they all integrate with the email applications, and that's pretty easy to click on an email and click on a little button inside Outlook, for example, that says save the email, and then the email and its attachments are in a place where other people can find it in your office. You can also make PDFs if you don't have another means of storing them electronically, but you can't let people just keep them in their inbox and have that be the only place they're stored. And for God's sake, don't print them. And we still see almost every firm has at least a few people that are either all the time or occasionally printing emails, and that helps no one. And all it does is make more paper, and it's impossible to search. So there's got to be a key thing on this with the blizzard of email we all receive. You've got to have an electronic way of managing that.
And by the way, with this COVID environment that we're all working in, we've seen, and our volume of physical mail had already dropped dramatically from prior years. And it's now down to almost a trickle because it's harder for clients to go to an office and actually copy something or print something and get it in an envelope and get it posted and so on. So people are gravitating towards more electronics. They're also gravitating towards more email. And I feel like the number of emails I'm seeing every day is increased by 30%, maybe more. A lot of them are kind of suggesting that people don't have what to do with their time, so they're sending emails. But the need to do what Baron just said has grown, and I think that's going to be a permanent change. We're all going to see lots more email, a lot less physical mail. So we got to get organized if you haven't already. Baron?
What we have is that this save the store the email outside the app. We actually worked with our document management system so that same screen you saw earlier pops up when an email is sent, and you basically are asked to fill in and save it just as you would any other document. We do allow a bypass on that because we don't want to save my email to Baron, hey, can you help me with, computer X today or something like that. But we require that save.
This
And
just
that goes right into
restating.
your document management system?
Right.
Yeah, we save all our emails into document management. They actually, it integrates with the practice management as well, so they end up in the same, you can see them in 2 different places.
Yeah, a lot of the case management, good point. A lot of the case/matter management programs also have integration with your email applications, and you can store those emails right with the electronic files that they belong with one click.
So how do you manage the staff remotely is a question that I got a lot on. And so for us, where we've kind of grown and we have various teams internally, and that's been in talking to employers, as I'm sure we all have done, I'm hearing a lot of interesting stories. Some people are super effective outside and some are not, and how you manage people differently changes. So we use Microsoft Teams for that. So you can use Zoom or GoTo or anything you have. But we like Teams because you can kind of leave that open all day, do quick chats on stuff that you don't want saved in the document management system. You can see whether people are available. And then what we do, and we're going to continue this, is so we're in Nebraska, and even though our curve is going up, we are going back. We're reopening everything. The mall opened last week, actually. I'm not going there, but others apparently did and are going to restaurants and all kinds of crazy stuff. We're continuing even while we are back in the office physically today. We still function remotely. So we have a policy, well, you're not allowed to walk in my office because I don't know where you've been. You might have been to the mall. But so we use Teams, and we found that to be so effective in managing. And since we're kind of keeping it remote in the office environment, we use that. We have daily huddles. But we have everybody send to the people that they work with a morning project plan saying, hey, this is what I'm going to work on today. And they account about that at the end of the day. And those are the ways that we've kind of kept productivity up.
And one little thing to add about Teams, it's part of Office 365. So if you have Office 365, you already have Teams. And there's an online version of it, and there's also a free download Windows and Mac app that'll run locally on your computer. We just are experimenting right now. Vonage Business has an integration with Teams so that you can use Teams for your telephone. And we have a pilot group of which I'm a member where we're testing that. And so far I am super impressed with how easy that is to also be your telephone system. So some of the voice over IP hosted providers are building in integrations with Teams because so many people already have it, and it provides so many other things, not least of which is instant messaging. And that is another thing. When people are all spread out, an instant message system is super handy. And not only is it make it really quick, I don't need any more email. If somebody has a quick question, I much prefer they just pop up an IM and I can answer it and move on. And then Teams also records the little IM conversations so that you can go back and read them later if you can't remember what was decided. The most important thing, whatever it is you decide to do, it all needs to be written down, and everybody needs to have some training. With what we're dealing with today, a lot of that training is going to be surrounding security and cybersecurity, and how do we make sure that our confidential client data is being protected when it's being accessed from people using possibly home devices. So, that's another one of those kind of things we didn't have to really think about too much before. But in particular, if you don't provide laptops for folks and they're going to go home and use their home devices to connect, we got to make sure those devices are secure.
I said on training, we've gone to where we have once a week, just a 30-minute huddle. It might not last 30 minutes, but it's mandatory for everybody that works here. And whatever issues came up during that week with regard to tech, which last week it was somebody inserting bullet points in a document that was created in Hot Docs, and the formatting was different. So we had to solve that and show everybody how to do that. It might be that, or it might be a feature on Teams, something like that. But we just do that every single week and touch on what's fresh in everybody's mind.
One of the things that we did is I recently added an administrative like client name in our billing system for tech matters, so that we keep an ongoing record of anything we've done in the office that relates to technology. That makes it easy to go back and review and discuss what we've done and track that we've addressed the issues that have been raised. Oh, do you want to comment, Mary, on how to stay focused remotely?
So I have to say that I was hoping somebody else would have good comments on that, because I'm one of the people who is hyper focused all of the time. And they used to make jokes. People make jokes that bombs could blow up around me and I wouldn't lose my focus. So I'm just super focused. And so do you have any thoughts? What helps you? I'm betting you're sort of like me on that. And I know Baron is.
I'm completely different, Mary. They always said the office could burn down and I wouldn't even know it was on fire. So I sit in my armchair with my laptop on my lap and a cup of coffee, and I just work away.
Yeah, so that's me. And I know Baron and I are, one of the like little known facts that you'll enjoy is that we've actually taught a mindfulness seminar together. One of our glorious webinar moments, but we're all kind of hyper focused. So I guess my suggestions would be, to the extent of any struggles, that it's, you know, that's probably the person that does need to have the space that they have, work and set hours and things like that. I think those of us on this call are probably all work from anywhere, wherever, and just enjoy what we do a lot.
Mary's my actual long lost twin sister. She just didn't realize it. If you want to see the mindfulness webinar that I did, go to my website, Shankman Law, look under webinars, and there's a mindfulness webinar that's really fascinating. You might want to watch. We better go on before we reveal more stuff, Mary. Video conferencing. We've been using go-to products, GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar. This program is being run on GoToWebinar and GoToMyPC to remote into our office, so we don't have an issue of anybody using anything on their home laptops or computers, because they use GoTo and go into the office, and they go through the GoTo MyPC portal to protect it. Next round, we're gonna when we replace our desktops, we're gonna just get laptops. So for the future, because I think the remote working environment is with us forever, it's not gonna change even when we go back. So we're gonna go to full laptops, and I may even talk to Baron. Mary, don't listen about docking stations, but we're definitely going to that environment. In terms of video conferencing, the go-to products are now owned by LogMeIn. There's a webinar that I did some weeks ago with one of the executives from the LogMeIn company on GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, that you can see on our website. It's a great product. We've used it for many, many years. We find it's actually more efficient to review a complex document on a GoToMeeting than it is in person, because the clients stay focused because they're sitting at home comfortably looking at their laptop, and we can scroll through a document and they're focused on it. We find it takes literally about half the time to review, say, a trust or a will or another document with a client working in that environment than in the typical in-office meeting. So we've been doing that for years very effectively. Now it's just the norm. There's no real choice. Anyone else want to comment?
So I wanted to comment on one, but there's a typo in conferences at the end. I was hoping you could fix ensuring control. But one of the comments that I made on here, because it's a conversation that's come up, is because we are remote, there's become like a tendency to have all meetings by Zoom or GoTo or whatever, or WebEx or whatever the format is. And the thing is, for many, many years, a lot of things, telephone conferences worked. So the question is, do we really need to have a video conference for every single thing when we, telephone conferences? Because there's actually a label out there, they're calling it Zoom fatigue, but it could be, video conferencing fatigue, where people are having to be on in a different way than they did, even with a busy schedule. So it's just considered, do you really need the video, or is a phone conference really okay? And if a phone conference worked for the last 20 years, then it's probably still okay.
I would suggest something a slight bit different. I think part of the Zoom fatigue, as Mary called it, cute phrase, is, you got to get out of your PJs and put on a shirt true. Like Baron and I did. Jonathan is always dressed in a tux, so he didn't have to change his usual attire.
I'm not wearing pants right now, but
Don't tell us, please, Baron. Don't tell us. But I think the webcams are unnecessary for most of the meetings. I set up virtually every communication with a client as a web meeting, so that if it's decided that we need to look at a document, we're already there. We just click on and it's there.
Yeah.
I rarely use the webcams. I find them kind of really they're a distraction. And I think that's exactly what the Zoom fatigue is. But the web interface to review a document I find very helpful. So I guess that kind of is really the same feeling you had, and just a little more robust than a phone, but not with what almost becomes silliness and superfluous of the videos.
Okay, let me just say one thing about that. Our leadership team actually handed down a mandate that we were supposed to use our video cameras because nobody did. Like, I have web meetings, 3 times a day, and I would never turn on my video camera. And there are studies that indicate that you connect better with people when you can see them when you're speaking with them. And I will say, like, right before we did this conference, I had to connect to a client who's working out of her home in Philly, and I hadn't seen her in a while, and it was just kind of cool to, like, it's just a different connection. It's a different level of connection we were actually talking about a document, like that was the point, and I was sharing my screen and we were going over a revocable trust in this case, or an irrevocable trust. And it worked quite well, but it was also nice to see her, I have to say, even though I would rather, I already had the shirt on because of this, so I was like, I'm ready for this now.
Well, one of the things that I have discovered is that when you're on a telephone call, people almost always will be multitasking. At least when you're seeing them, you can, maybe they'll peek down a little bit at their iPhone or something, but you're going to get more attention to the topic, I think, if you can see the other person.
Guys, we have to start to wrap up. Baron, why don't you go over whatever topics or points you feel we should cover that are important, and then we'll just jump to a conclusion, because we're pretty much at past 90 minutes at this point.
Well, you could just jump to the conclusion. I think we've covered everything.
Okay, so why don't you, Baron, make a concluding comment, and then we'll turn it to Mary, and then Jonathan, then me.
All right, my concluding comment is one last thing that I think is really important that people should consider, and we do have a slide on it. It's just far in the deck, and that is the importance of a password manager. I think it's the easiest, best thing. I think from an estate planning perspective, we should be talking with our clients about having a password manager so that they've got some place to store all those logins and passwords. And ultimately, the good ones allow you to share with loved ones all of those logins and passwords. And like my estate could not be administered but for the fact that I've got all that stuff in a password manager, which I've shared with my wife. So I think that's kind of an important and very, very inexpensive. They all have free trials. The most you'll spend is $5 a month for one with all the bells and the whistles.
And I'm going to just add to that, I'm become an absolute advocate of both the password manager and paying really, really close attention to all the frauds and the scams and the ways that they will try and snag your password. Like, never, ever, ever save a password in your browser. And I'll tell you a story where we had our first hit, which we kind of lucked out on, is I was traveling to California, and it was one of the few times I decided that I felt comfortable traveling with one less laptop than I usually do. And the laptop I had got the, black screen of death while I was sitting in the Minneapolis airport. Bad. So I had my office administrator purchase a replacement laptop, and the hotel concierge had it there for me when I got there. I set it up. But what happened is, because I had just newly set it up, and then I got a request for a password that looked like it was from Microsoft 365, which was actually a hacker, who then got my password, so Microsoft 365. Fortunately, I was sitting there on my computer and I watched somebody starting to make rules. So I immediately got on the IT, and the IT said, well, maybe those are, so I was like, okay, you guys are idiots. I changed the password myself, managed to get the guy out. But in the maybe couple minutes that person was in there, they did a search for invoices and snagged the name of somebody we'd emailed an invoice to, and basically sent them an email saying, hey, don't, we had some problem. We need you to, transfer funds to this account rather than here. And so that's just, I always thought, oh, we're super secure. I'm super techie. We're super careful. Just the password manager, and then paying attention to all the different scams that are going on out there is hugely important.
Jonathan?
Well, I find this kind of stuff fascinating, and it's only going to get better They have now developed a technology called holograms, where instead of just seeing each other, you will appear to each other in 3 dimensions. I don't know how far away that is. Baron, maybe you have a better idea than I do, but it is a technology that is now available. And once that happens, the thought of going into the office, which now obviously is going to be much less often than it was before the virus, it's going to diminish to a very, very small point.
I participated in a happy hour for one of those that's in the trial process called Spatial. So I've been trying to figure out how to use that in legal. It was really amazing.
That'll be the end of us all wearing jammies with our button-down shirts.
That's right.
So I said I'd make shameless plugs for Baron.
Stop.
These are the notes that I took on my last program
Stop.
with Baron. These are the notes I took from Baron on this program. And I have a consult scheduled with Baron for, I think, this week or next week. And as the list has grown so long, it's going to take at least another 2 or 3 consults to get through them. It's an ongoing process. We all have too much to do. We all have to keep up with massive changes in the law. The Secure Act is mind-boggling in its complexity, but we can't neglect keeping current. Stephen Covey always talked about sharpening the saw. It's not just sharpening the estate planning or legal or tax or accounting saw. We got to keep sharpening the tech saw, because you have to have an understanding. You got to keep adapting to new technology. I find it sometimes very painful and frustrating, but the more you do it, the better you will practice, and the happier you will be, and the more efficient and safer you will be. So I encourage you all to do it. And honestly, what I would do is just take notes. There's at least another 3 or 4, maybe more tech webinars on the Schenkman Law website. I think they're all on Interactive Legal's website as well. Take notes, make an appointment with Baron, and get him to help you. That's my advice. I got, like I said, the new monitor from him. I have my new web camera, but there weren't enough USB ports to hook this up. So I was going to have a better web camera, so I'd look better on the call. But I ran out of USB ports because I got my headset that I just got and my laptop. And I had tons of stuff before. Now I think when I go traveling, I'm going to be traveling worse than Mary, because not only do I have 2 laptops that are complete duplicates, because just like Mary said, that black screen of death is always out there. Now I'm in love with my second monitor, so I have to have 2 laptops and a monitor and an extra camera. I mean, I'm going to have to start just packing, my tech bag. So I hope this was helpful. I learned a lot. I appreciate greatly Baron Henley from Affinity Consulting, Mary Vanderneck, who's not only a brilliant technician as an estate planning attorney, but really the most tech savvy attorney, and Jonathan Blottmacher, who has certainly been at the foundation of technology and estate planning for ever since I can remember. So thank you all for participating. Thank you for Pekin Interactive for co-sponsoring the program. And a charity that we mentioned today was the ABF, and the American Brain Foundation is certainly an organization worthy of your support. Stay safe, and hopefully this all helped you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.